Hello, I'm Edward de Mere, speaker on a variety of programs at Pharma. Many companies have developed brand plan templates or have consultants who've assisted in developing these brand plan templates, which are good from the perspective that they create a certain uniform level of planning across their whole organizations for different brands, for different country organizations. The major drawback of using templates is that people tend to fill out templates without necessarily thinking about the insights that these might be generating. I believe that in a world which is fast changing, we need to make sure that the brand plans address all of the insights, both from the competitors and the stakeholders, to be able to be proactive in this particular fast changing world. So while it is good to have brand planning templates, these should be complemented with quality assurance checkpoints to ensure that their quality is good and they lead to insightful strategies and tactics. The first section of the brand plan typically reveals the insights from the marketplace, from customers, from competitors. And the first step is to identify the patient flows. The real question when you see a patient flow is whether you can detect any patient potentials which might be a key leverage point for your particular brand. And then to better understand who these particular patients are, which profiles they have they been diagnosed, have they not been diagnosed, have they been treated by physician X, are they in healthcare system Y or Z? These are the insights that patient flows should be developing. Having understood the patient potentials that might exist for a particular brand, the next step is then to understand the treatment decision tree. The goal is here to understand how a patient gets from being ill to actually being cured. And you might see a patient that might first be seen by a general practitioner, then referred to a specialist. The specialist might require to do some diagnostics. Then that diagnostic will confirm that the patient has a particular disease. Then a treatment will be chosen based on the availability and the accessibility of a particular treatment in a particular healthcare system, and then that patient will comply and maybe rather than relapse will get a next line of treatment, etc., etc. What we need to understand is who are the stakeholders that the patients will encounter during each of these steps. Once that has been done, we then need to analyze each of these stakeholders that have a certain relevant role in making sure that the patient gets their particular treatment. And we need to understand what we call the stakeholder influence in an influence map, but then for the key stakeholders to understand what are their beliefs, behaviors, needs, what irritates them, so that we really have an in-depth insight in these particular stakeholders. Clearly, when we do our market assessment, we'll also need to understand the competition. Now, many companies have embarked on competitive intelligence exercises where you have a database somewhere with all sorts of things, useful or less useful, compliant sometimes, or less compliant sometimes. What we really need to do is to understand which decisions we need to make vis-a-vis the competition. Are they decisions that relate to patient selection? Are they decisions relating to how we will position ourselves in the market? Are they decisions which relate to, I don't know, pricing, size of field force, or whatever? Based on the key questions that we need to answer, we then need to go back and understand what are the critical parts of competitive intelligence that we need to gather and hence create what we call a demand-driven competitive intelligence process. Once the insights have been developed, we then move into the development of a SWOT analysis. Now, the SWOT analysis has often been seen as something which is a bit old-fashioned, and I've heard some senior executives in pharma companies ask me, should we still do a SWOT analysis? And actually the answer is yes, because A situation analysis in today's complex and highly changeable world will reveal all sorts of things from, for example, the various stakeholders which we didn't used to have before, from competitors who will be engaging in various types of medical activities, from competitors who will have specific access programs. All of that typically yields a pretty heavy situation analysis. And two things will be important. First is that each of the sections that we analyze will have some insights developed, but then once we get into the SWOT, we'll need to really pick out those key insights in order to make sure that our SWOT analysis are really insightful. Once the SWOT has been generated, we get into the strategy building part. And in the strategy building part, the first step is to actually segment the market. Segment the market according to healthcare professionals, payers, etc. And the idea is that our patient segmentation, our HCP segmentation, needs to be aligned. If we decompose in our cross-functional team, the medical team segmenting the market according to patients, the sales team segmenting the market according to HCPs, the access teams decomposing the market according to the various types of payers that we have, then we have a company that's really not aligned. So we need to make sure that we have an integrated segmentation approach. Once the market segmentation has been done, a key component will then be to choose the target markets that we want to address as a priority, to answer the question, where should we play? And that needs to be clarified according to a certain set of criteria which typically relate to market attractiveness factors, size of a patient pool, size of a prescriber pool, but it also relates to factors of competitive advantage. Do we have the product that is required by those patients? Do we have the competences inside our organization to deal with a specific set of HCPs? Once that has been done, we need to develop a brand positioning statement. And the brand positioning statement will really define how we will win in that particular segment that we've chosen to play in. A brand positioning statement needs to include both some functional differentiators, product attributes if you like, but they also need to include emotional differentiators. And the industry needs to understand how we can make emotional differentiators in a compliant way based on factual differences between our products, between the companies operating in the marketplace. Once we have defined how we will win, some key messages will need to be defined resulting from our brand positioning statement. Then we get into the tactical plan development, and this is where a lot of companies will have some form of critical success factors. Some companies call these strategic imperatives. Some companies call these things pivotal challenges. Some companies have different names for these, such as key drivers. What they call it, it really doesn't matter. The important thing, though, is that these particular critical success factors are not definitions of activities. I often see pharma companies that say, oh, well, our access team needs to develop the access dossier, the value dossier by that date, or our sales force needs to visit the doctors 6 times a year, or whatever. These are all activity-based. If you want to be market-led, which is the ambition of an integrated brand plan, the critical success factors should be defined as stakeholder mindsets. For example, for a payer, be willing to recommend the use of a particular product, or be willing to make budget available at a lower level of the payer hierarchy. For HCPs, it would be willing to diagnose a particular patient marker. It would be to ensure that the patient is compliant. It would be to recognize the difference between 2 different brands in the marketplace, etc. So the critical success factors should be defined as stakeholder-orientated goals. Once we've done that, we then need to start to develop our cross-functional tactical plans that address those specific stakeholder mindsets. So, for example, we might decide to do a particular meeting in order to discuss a particular compliance issue with the key opinion leaders in a particular market segment. Could just be an example. Once the tactical plans have been defined, and for me it's important to make sure that the tactics all address a specific stakeholder who is a crucial person that will address that particular critical success factor that has been defined in the brand plan. Once those tactics have been defined, we then need to monitor those using key performance indicators. And I very often see in brand plans key performance indicators such as sales or patient share. And these are not really extremely useful because they're lagging indicators. If in December you find out your patient share is not where it should be, it's too late to do anything about it. We should be measuring somewhere in May or June, say, what the attitude of the various HCP is to our particular therapy, which then will allow us to assume that we might reach that lagging indicator, which is called sales by December. If we're not, then we'll have to readdress our strategy in the third and the fourth quarter. Finally, finance. The pharmaceutical industry is very much driven by finance in many of the pharma companies. And I think that's good because we need to make sure that we allocate our resources in an efficient way. We cannot waste resources. That would not be ethical. And on top of that, it would not be very good use of the resources which our shareholders make available to us inside the pharmaceutical companies. And very often we see a whole brand plan, and then at the end we have some forecasts, which are sometimes even linear sales forecasts, with a bit of expense behind it, with an unclear relationship between the expense and the sales. While we need to be compliant, it's important to make sure that we develop different strategic options. We need to say, well, maybe we could just develop patient share, or we could develop patient share and increase the amount of diagnostics in a particular disease area. Those would be two very different strategies and also require very different resource, which we would need to see whether they are actually profitable for our organization. The other thing which is very difficult to do in finance is to understand what will happen in the future. We have big congresses that might change the future of a product. We have also different events such as payer HTAs, for example, that could completely change the reimbursement landscape. So it's probably also useful to define 2 or 3 scenarios, not to get into very long contingency plans, but just to identify what are the 2-3 things that might actually have an impact to our particular financial position, and then relate the upsides and the downsides to this. Brand plans need to be based on some sort of a formal structure, hence we probably need templates, but I believe it is a crucial role of the market-led teams to ensure that these 13 quality assurance checkpoints are in fact in place beyond just filling out some brand plans. I think the marketing function has moved very much from a situation where you actually gather clinical data, you put it in a message, and then you train the sales force to deliver that message, which is still the case, but I think it becomes a little bit less the case. A crucial role of the marketing function to me is to ensure that our whole cross-functional team needs to be aligned around what is the brand strategy. And therefore, the document is maybe a little bit less important, but the process and the quality and the consensus that we generate during this brand planning process is actually the crucial outcome which will lead to a brand success in the marketplace.